Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Stephen Colbert's Late Show cancellation and federal cuts to U.S. public media.
They clarified that the cancellation was purely a financial decision. But how could it purely be a financial decision if The Late Show is number one in ratings? A lot of folks... It's confusing.
How are President Trump and a handful of billionaires changing the media? I'm Manuel Ràpalo, and this is The Take.
My name's Rusty Foster. I'm a writer. I write a newsletter called Today in Tabs, which is about media, politics, technology a little bit, and whatever else kind of catches my eye on the internet on a day-to-day basis.
Rusty, welcome to The Take. You've been covering U.S. media of all kinds for years, and last week we saw some seismic events happen, major hits with the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's Late Show by CBS Paramount.
Before we start the show, I want to let you know something that I found out just last night. Next year will be our last season. The network will be ending The Late Show in May.
That's one, Trump suing the Wall Street Journal. That's two, and Congress approving federal cuts to public broadcasting like PBS and NPR. President Trump saw all of this as a big win. Can you walk us through what happened?
I mean, it was a bad week in media that has come at the end of a year's worth of bad weeks in media. So Paramount owns CBS. Paramount is attempting to merge with a company called Skydance Media. Skydance Media is owned by Larry Ellison's son, David Ellison. Larry Ellison, the multi-billionaire from Oracle, gave his son, David Ellison, $8 billion and said, go ahead and buy Paramount. So CBS has been losing money and has been struggling financially. That merger, this $8 billion merger, requires the approval of the Trump administration. And the Trump administration is not happy with CBS over an interview that 60 Minutes did with Kamala Harris during the election, which Donald Trump alleged was misleadingly edited in order to interfere with the election. So Donald Trump sued Paramount and CBS over that interview, claiming $20 billion in damages, which is an existential amount of money for Paramount. The suit was entirely without merit, which I think everybody commenting on it agreed. But in the past, what we've seen with media suits is it depends on what judge you get. So does Paramount have any appetite for that kind of existential risk at this point when they're trying to close a big merger? Not particularly. And CBS News ultimately did agree to settle for $16 million paid to Donald Trump. And that, everybody felt, was the big fat bribe, as Stephen Colbert called it, that would pave the way to get this merger finished.
Now, I believe this kind of complicated financial settlement with a sitting government official has a technical name in legal circles. It's big fat bribe.
So that's the backstory for this. And then by Tuesday, the network had announced that it would not renew his contract in May. And in fact, it wouldn't even renew The Late Show and hire a new host, which Stephen came on to replace David Letterman.
Yeah. And Rusty, Colbert has consistently criticized President Donald Trump. For years, his show has been number one in ratings among late shows. But in statements, CBS said that the cancellation was, quote, purely a financial decision, given the fact that late night in general, arguably, is on the decline. Why was Stephen Colbert's show canceled?
CBS has said that they are losing $40 million a year on Stephen Colbert's number one in his time slot Late Show. I feel like anybody who's familiar with Hollywood financing knows that, you can turn a hit into a flop or a flop into a hit, depending on how you count the numbers. To me, the claim that it's financial is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. Because the very obvious thing is they fired Stephen to make Donald Trump happy. And the next day, Donald Trump posted, "I'm so happy that you fired Stephen Colbert." So it's not hard to connect the dots here. Stephen Colbert's audience was, over the last season, an average of a little over 2.4 million viewers every night for 40 episodes. If the executives at CBS can't find a way to take 2.4 million viewers every night 40 times in a row and make that profitable, that seems grossly incompetent to me. So The question is the firing incompetent or is it corrupt? I don't know. I guess take your pick.
The optics for CBS here certainly are not good.
Right.
Is it fair to think that there's retribution behind this, that this is payback? It seems to send a message that no matter how popular your show is, no matter if you're number one in late night, or if you criticize President Trump, you can be silenced.
The Late Show's audience grew over after last quarter. Quarter two was 1% above quarter one. I would say that it looks flat to me, which is not growth, but it's also not, the kind of crashing decline that requires you to cut 200 plus jobs. I don't think that Donald Trump ever sat down anybody at CBS and said, hey, fire this guy. I think what Jon Stewart called it, a kind of air of pre-compliance that is sweeping the American corporate world in general and media in particular.
I think the answer is in the fear and pre-compliance that is gripping all of America's institutions at this very moment.
We know from Oliver Darcy's reporting in March that once the merger closes, the president of Paramount will be a man named Jeff Shell. He, earlier this year, sat down with CBS News executives and pressured them to settle the Trump suit for money. So it's not a mystery which side the incoming Skydance executives are on here.
Well, I was actually going to ask you how you feel, like on a personal level, because you didn't work for Stephen Colbert directly, but you did in a way. Can you explain that?
From 2013 to about 2020, I worked for a software company that Stephen Colbert co-founded, writing software for late night and for movies. It's called Scripto. So Stephen always said that it was kind of that or buy a Ferrari as far as what he could do with the amount of money that he funded us for. So yeah, he's a nerd. He loves computers. His Lord of the Rings fandom is widely known. So I did not, on a day-to-day basis work directly with him, but I did meet him a number of times and worked pretty closely with him for about 7 years. So I worked pretty closely with the staff at The Daily Show, The Late Show, Colbert Report before that. John Oliver. I have in my life never worked with a smarter or harder working bunch of people, particularly at The Late Show. The staff of The Late Show is the pinnacle of television production. They're the best of the best. So Stephen would call on a Monday. He'd say, Friday, we're doing Friday's show live, and they would make it happen. So I am personally angry about this cancellation. I think it's wrong. I think it's short-sighted, and I think it's just the latest example of the kind of clear-cutting mentality that billionaires and private equity have brought to the American media landscape. They're just stripping it for short-term profit and leaving, the long-term health of the culture to suffer.
And we'll talk about billionaires, but Rusty, news of Stephen Colbert's cancellation came as Congress voted to rescind previously allocated funding for public broadcasters like PBS and NPR here in the United States.
On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 213. The resolution is adopted.
That's more than just a budget cut. That is Congress giving up part of its constitutional authority to President Trump.
We're not just putting PBS at risk here. We're putting millions of Americans who depend on local media for life-saving information.
How big of a deal is that? And what impact do you believe this is going to have on independent journalism?
Sure. I mean, it's a very big deal. It's, like you said, first of all, Congress giving up, simply rolling over and saying, well, if the president doesn't like what we've allocated, we'll vote to do whatever the president wants to do. It's not a brand new feature, but, presidents from Nixon to Reagan to George W. Bush have all sought to defund PBS and NPR because it's independent media that competes with corporate media that they don't control. And as far as the impact of it, it's terrible. I think of NPR and PBS as the media version of the kind of rural electrification project of the 1930s. You can look at the landscape and say that corporate media is not going to be able to survive or be profitable in markets of, 5,000 or 6,000 people. Those people deserve to have the news, just like they deserve to have electricity. And so for decades now, the U.S. government has funded media that could not be profitable and that doesn't need to be profitable because it's a public service. And in defunding NPR and PBS, I feel like they've abandoned that responsibility, and they've abandoned particularly the rural people of America, people in Wyoming, people in Alaska. People in places that don't have the kind of New York, Chicago, LA media infrastructure.
If you had to explain what is happening right now with media in the United States to someone who doesn't get their news from the legacy news outlets like CBS or CNN or MSNBC, and maybe they get most of their news from TikTok and other social media, what would you say is at stake here?
What's at stake is the ability of people to know the truth about what's happening in the world. I would also say that we are at the tail end of a long process of decline in the ability of American people to know what's going on in the world. Over just my lifetime, we have systematically stripped protections against monopoly growth in media and a bunch of other industries. And we've seen, smaller newspapers get gobbled up by larger newspapers, and then larger newspapers get gobbled up by television networks, and then TV conglomerates and movie producers get gobbled up by internet companies, which is what, Skydance is essentially. Their stated goal is to form a technology media conglomerate. So the conglomerates are getting bigger, the numbers of them are getting smaller. They're getting controlled by a smaller and smaller number of wealthier and wealthier, generally, men. I feel like right now we're at an interesting inflection point between billionaires who own media, who made their billions in media, like Michael Bloomberg and Rupert Murdoch, for example, and the Redstones who own Paramount right now, Sherry Redstone and Sumner Redstone before her, and billionaires who are buying their way into media, who I think by and large have shown that they care a lot less about the business of media per se. Jeff Bezos and Patrick Soon-Shiong in the LA Times, and now if this goes through, the Ellisons owning Paramount.
More with Rusty after the break.
In 1990s Russia, 5 women were enslaved by a serial killer called Alexander Komin. When some of them finally escaped, nobody believed them. We'll investigate this story and others from across the globe on True Crime Reports.
So, Rusty, in your recent newsletter from July 18th, you say that, quote, billionaires destroyed American news media on purpose. It's not a conspiracy. It's simply what happened, end quote. Mm-hmm. You describe vividly what happened at Twitter, now X, at the Washington Post, at Facebook. Walk us through all of that.
Sure. In 2013, so right when I started Today in Tabs, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, which was at the time a fairly struggling newspaper, but still one of the nation's largest and best read and best regarded. And Jeff Bezos said at the time, and I actually believe him, I believed him then, I believe him now, that he was buying it because he cared about the ability for news to inform the people. Jeff Bezos of 2013 is not the same person as Jeff Bezos of 2025. So this gets at one of the risks of letting all of your media be controlled by a small handful of extremely wealthy men, which is they can change their minds, they can change their priorities, they can change their friends. So Jeff Bezos now is a kind of, red-pilled tech lord who hangs around with Elon Musk. He was in the sort of gang of oligarchs standing next to Donald Trump at his latest inauguration. He told the Washington Post opinion section, which I was writing a column at the time for about a hike of the Appalachian Trail that I was doing. He told them that they were not going to run the Kamala Harris endorsement that the editorial board had decided on. And in fact, said that the entire opinion section would change its viewpoint to cover nothing but free markets and personal liberties.
I will read a memo from Jeff Bezos from February of this year. He said, quote, I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We're going to be writing every day in support of defense of 2 pillars, personal liberties and free markets. Bezos goes on to say, quote, we'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others.
Since the election, essentially most of the talent of Washington Post opinion has left. Everybody that I worked with has left. And it was clear to the people working there at the time that the paper was being gutted and hollowed out and rebuilt as a kind of MAGA mouthpiece to the whatever extent that Jeff Bezos could make that happen. Multi-billionaire biotech tycoon Patrick Soon-Shiong did the same thing at the LA Times, if anything, even more clumsily and more brutally. Elon Musk paid $44 billion to buy Twitter, which had been the place where journalism happened. It never drove a lot of traffic to stories, but Twitter was the place where journalists met and exchanged ideas and learned about the culture in a lot of ways. And Elon Musk destroyed that. Now it's the place where white supremacists meet and plan their Nazi parties.
And Facebook.
Yeah. So Facebook, for a long time, drew an audience by giving you a one-stop shop for news and information. So you would go to your Facebook wall and people would share stories and articles. Facebook drove a ton of traffic to independent media, the early 2010s and before. And circa the first Trump administration, Mark Zuckerberg decided he wasn't interested in that anymore and simply essentially cut off and demonetized news on Facebook. That was the death knell for a lot of the independent media that, I started covering in Today and Tabs from 2013 to 2016. Journalists lost jobs. A lot of them never came back to the industry. It's just watching the news industry from 2013 to today, it's unmistakable how much poorer we are today than we were then. It's a straight line. It's a straight line from the actions of a bunch of individual billionaires to those results.
Rusty, if the U.S. Department of Justice greenlights this $8 billion merger with Paramount and Skydance Media, as you mentioned, owned by David Ellison, the son of the billionaire Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, who happens to be one of the wealthiest men in the world. What other changes do you think we could see to CBS and across the Paramount-owned properties, like The Daily Show? Could Jon Stewart be next? How dangerous of a precedent is this for other outlets?
It doesn't take a Nostradamus to see the future. It's already happening. It's already, Stephen Colbert is canceled. For why? Who knows? Is Jon Stewart going to be next? Of course. Of course. I think that every sign about the incoming team from Skydance is that they are leaning significantly more right, and they want to cooperate with the Trump administration to the maximum extent possible. I think it's terrible. I grew up in an America where famously everybody was proud that you could go on TV and make fun of the president. That country doesn't exist anymore. If you go on TV and make fun of the president, you could lose your job. You could get sued into oblivion, which, Donald Trump is trying to do to the Wall Street Journal right now, having seen reporting from them that he doesn't like. So it's a dark time.
And I'm sorry, but do you only have bad news to share with us on the show today here? Is there a way to take a free and independent media back?
Yeah, I'm just describing what's already happening. We're just about at the end of the bad process. I am actually very optimistic, and people are surprised when I say that, because the core reality is that people want to know what's going on in the world. Most people want to know what the truth is. They're, right now they have a tough time finding it because our information ecosystem is so poisoned. But people do want to know the truth, and reporters want to tell them the truth. There is a certain class of personality damaged individuals who are just desperate to find out the truth and then share it with everybody else. I love them dearly. Some of my best friends are reporters. So the demand is there. The supply will always be there. The question is just, what are we going to do as a society? We've done it in the past. The way you create a free market, if Jeff Bezos really wants free markets, the way you create a free market is regulation. The way you create a fair sporting event is rules. A football game with no rules would not be a fair game. People are doing what they can right now in the context that we have, which is there are a lot of journalists who are out of a job who still want to do their job, so they're starting to band together and form their own, cooperative journalist-owned news outlets like 404 Media covering tech, Hellgate, which is doing local New York news, which almost doesn't exist right now, which is baffling because New York has the highest concentration of news media in the world right now. But there's hardly anything covering local New York news. People are doing that, and that is one thing that makes me hopeful. I don't think it's ultimately the solution to the future of mass media.
And you've touched on this already, but I'd be remiss not to ask specifically about what the risks are here, the warning of big mergers and monopolies that concentrate media in the hands of a few billionaires?
I mean, the risks are simply that people get less and less access to the truth. People are less able to make good decisions for themselves and for their families and for their communities. Media is important. So the more of that you put in the hands of a smaller and smaller number of the ultra wealthy, the less functional we can be as a country. You know, you can look at Russia as maybe an endpoint, which we are not very far from right now in terms of, you know, one political party that rules the entire government, supported by a small number of ultra wealthy oligarchs. We're teetering on the precipice of that right now in the United States. I mean, eventually 6 giant media conglomerates to 3 giant media conglomerates, eventually either Google or Facebook, one of the giant tech firms, owns all of the media through an octopus of different subsidiaries, and you just have one company that controls all of the media. I don't necessarily think that's likely to happen, but that's the direction we're headed. If we as people don't decide to elect representatives that bring some regulation and some sanity back to American monopoly laws, that's the direction we're headed. And it's, we're very close.
Yeah. Well, Rusty Foster, thank you for joining us today on The Take.
Thank you for having me.
And that's The Take. If you're short on time but still want to catch the highlights, check out our YouTube Shorts. We post quick clips with the best moments from our episodes that you won't want to miss. It's a great way to stay connected, so check them out. And I'll see you tomorrow.